I really appreciate everybody being here. I think we can get underway. There may be folks dropping in. A couple of chairs we can bring over and adjust the circle as need be. Yeah, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Blacksburg Public Library. My name is Bob Leonard. I teach in the theater and cinema program in the School of Performing Arts at Tech. This is the second in the School of Performing Arts Colloquium series. And it's just great to have everybody here in person and some on Zoom.
The doctor's project.
Okay.
Having a hard time.
They're having trouble on the Zoom side. Okay. These talks and exchanges by nationally recognized artists and leading thought leaders are a core piece of our MFA in Theater degree program's graduate seminar, bringing their perspectives, insights, experience, hopes, and strategies into the studies of the next generation of theater makers here at Tech. We have discovered that these exchanges about art and community, how art serves to build community and engages with civic dialogue, serve the interests of folks well beyond the classroom. It's just great that you are all here in person in Blacksburg and on Zoom. This is an owl. Besides wisdom, it sees everything, but I don't know where to look. I would like to remind you that in 2 weeks, we'll be hosting the third in the series. Megan Carney will be here on Thursday, April 4 at 4:30 in the afternoon. Megan is the artistic director of About Face Theater in Chicago. The unique experiences and valuable national perspectives of these leaders have direct impact on how we understand and utilize the arts in our own communities, large and small, across the country. For our audience on Zoom, please feel free to use the chat feature to communicate. With a good crowd on Zoom, I appreciate that you will respect our request to remain muted unless invited to unmute. Please share your thoughts, your questions, your desire to speak on that chat feature. I'm so excited now to introduce Harold Steward. Harold is a modern philosopher, a cultural strategist, an educator, and a public intellectual. He is also a member of Alternate Roots, an organization in the Southeast that I'm very dear to. Harold joined the New England Foundation for the Arts, NEFA for short, as executive director in July 2023. Prior to joining NEFA, they served as executive director and culture strategist at the Theater Offensive in Boston, a not-for-profit organization that presents liberating art by, for, and about queer and trans people of color, that transcends artistic boundaries, celebrates cultural abundance, and dismantles oppression. They previously served as manager of the South Dallas Cultural Center, which provides instruction and enrichment in the arts with an emphasis on the African contribution to world culture. In 2009, Harold founded Fahari Arts Institute in Dallas after recognizing a gap in the landscape for local LGBTQ artists of color in Dallas. The Fahari Arts Institute celebrated, displayed, and produced the work of queer artists from the African diaspora. Harold is the chair of the board of directors for Theater Communications Group, the board clerk for Mass Creative, a member of the steering committee of the Black Theater Commons, a founding member of Next Gen National Arts Network, and the founding partner of Steward Cultural Development Group. Hi, Terry. Glad you can join us. Steward served as cultural equity facilitator with Equity Quotient, a consulting firm dedicated to supporting arts and culture nonprofits interested in becoming more just, equitable community partners with equity, diversity, and inclusion as outcomes of their work. Harold is an affiliate faculty member in the Department of Theater Studies at Emerson College, where their current research includes the queer trap aesthetic in American theater and identity reclamation, the process in which oppressed individuals reclaim agency over their identity through cultural production. Please join me in welcoming Harold Steward.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It is indeed an honor to be here, and you'll probably get a sense of, I'm sure everybody says that, right? Because you're supposed to say it. But hopefully throughout the presentation, you'll get more of a sense why I count it, more than an honor, but really a blessing. I think before I get into talking, then I'll get everything I'm supposed to do. I want to thank you, Professor Bob, for inviting me, for being a rooter. I think in the most purest sense of how alternate root members do our work and show up in the world and find connections and promote each other. I think in practice and ideas and the spirit of support that a network of artists from the South are engaged with the South and concerned about the South and notions of justice and humanity of each other, how we live out our values and how we practice liberation. So I'm really grateful for the invitation and to know that you are a fellow rooter. I said Linda Paris Bailey is on the Zoom, which makes this even more rewarding and also nerve-wracking because she is also a rooter and an elder and a beautiful spirit. And traditionally, when we gather together in places like this as rooters, we offer song. Song will not be offered by me today. It does not feel like the opening practice, or at least not the way in which we engage in it, but there are other offerings to open us up. Before we do that, I think maybe we should talk about some individual and shared objectives, right? How we will co-create the space and participate in it. I am glad to be here as a facilitator, as an invited guest, as someone who can offer maybe some thoughts and some reflections for us all to respond to, both in this physical space and to the guests and friends who are joining us via Zoom. That's all I am. I am an expert on nothing, right? I mean, I'm only 41. You have to be like 80 to be an expert, right? I'm working on being an expert on nothing. I'm curious about a lot of things. I am a Virgo by birth, which means I have an opinion about everything. I overanalyze most things, right? So I see my role more as a provocateur, right? We engage with the shared intelligence of the, no matter how these concepts resonate or not with you. We offer space for critical reflection, even for dissent, but all in the space of like shared understanding and building. I've been big Black male for 41 years now in this society. You have to really work hard to hurt my feelings. So I'm not easy, that sensitive anymore. The older I get, I tend to get more sensitive. But if we can co-create a space, a learning project, where we can be both brilliant and ignorant at the same time, then that is a particular offering. I struggle with public speeches because I never sit down to write this. And so lecturing, and so when I came in the room, there was a circle, and I'm like, oh, I can do this. But to stand at a podium with prepared thoughts and not really be under like the intimacy of the moment and the sheer presence of each other is a struggle for me. So I welcome this, and maybe we can animate it as a learning kind of classroom of sorts. So there may be times before I'm done with presentation that I invite you comment, question to respond to hold the space with me for thinking. So all of that is welcome, right? So again, very grateful again to you, Bob, to Ashley, who has been a wonderful caregiver, who braved nighttime and no traffic, but maybe sleep to come pick me up around 11 o'clock when the airport was bring me back here. But to also, I think, maybe start the conversation, right? And so maybe, hopefully, this is a continuation of what Ashley started at 11 o'clock last night on our drive here. I've also been very fortunate to participate in the podcast earlier today. And I feel like it's all relevant. This is a continuation. All right. Do we feel oriented in space and time? And do we understand? So I thought, you know, as I do, there's some slides that'll be up there, again, for our reference primarily, and some good visual aids because we all learn and connect differently. There was an invitation to respond to this topic, the power and practice of art in healthy communities. And when you are queer and struggle with answering questions directly, you come up with your own title, like Engaging the Black Audacity of Queer Ego. They may be repeated, right? They may not. But there is something, hopefully, as the slides will show and the conversation will lend itself to, there is this thing called Black audacity, right? This kind of Black conviction that has been handed down to me, that I operate from. And there's also the queer ego, and I think as theater practitioners, ego is vitally important if we understand how we got to realism. Especially realism based in psychology and sociology, the ego, the id, the subconscious, all of those things are really, really, really important. So as we go through the slides and just again, co-create the space, you may wonder and meditate on where's Black audacity showing up? Where's the queer ego showing up? Next slide. I say we would not start in song. Those were bad pictures to begin with. And now it's a little harder to see in the light, so I apologize. But we would not start in singing, but maybe we are starting in song if we believe the song, like for theater, is rooted in poetry. Harold Rosa, Bare Skin. When he is young, his youth is of no concern. There is melon in the middle of the fridge, a father's back to charter, barefoot. The lights always come on cue. Water basins are warm, full, heat to welcome winter, air to combat the sun, song on Sunday morning, blues in the midday light. Hip hop comes later, but we know it's coming. A grandmother at the top of the hill, aunt and uncle too. Hell to be raised, spirit to be free, vacations and vacant lots, a boy at school. Curveball on Saturday mornings, sun tea in summers, a dog tied to a tree, a neighbor's room to roam, sugar cookie from packs, clean clothes in the basket, weed in the can, St. Augustine on the back, an Easter speech, a haircut, a fishing rod, a little brother, a niece, nieces, a nephew, nephews, streetlights, curfews, beds for dreaming, and bare skin. The title of this piece is Harold Rosa, Bare Skin. It is in direct response to Nikki Giovanni's work, Nikki Rosa, where she uses the creative tongue and narrative language to describe her childhood. So when I said I'm really humbled to be here, I mean it because Nikki Giovanni has meant so much to me and my work. So to be in places I imagine, she also, maybe at some point came in this room in the library, I hope. but also to be here, in maybe ideological, allyship doesn't seem like the right word, but to be connected to our ideological thoughts here and our political thoughts here. To also know that she loved this place, right? And she labored here, and she did it in times of celebration, and she also did it in times of great sorrow here. So you know, many people think about where do you want to sojourn? You know, what places do you want to go? What are kind of iconic and monumental? And I didn't know that I wanted to come to Virginia Tech because Nikki Giovanni had been here, but it is so gratifying to be here knowing that she was here, and much of my life and work is in response to her. So Harold Rosa, Bare Skin is one example of that, where I got to think about my own childhood, and Nikki Giovanni in one of her poems says, you know, when you talk about Black audacity and conviction, I really hope no white man ever has cause to write about it. And she says that because they may misinterpret her childhood. They may not understand what Black love looks like. It's not parallel to a white type of love. They may see poverty and have sorrow. They may see other things and have other ideas, so inspired by that. I shared with folks earlier, it took me 40 years, some odd years to understand that I grew up free, right? Because freedom was defined by some other entity outside of myself, outside of my neighborhood. And freedom was not connected to, in my neighborhood of Singing Hills in Dallas, Texas, a certain type of capitalism and access to wealth, right? My father may say differently, right? But he was responsible for our well-being. And so maybe some of his ideas of freedom was because he knew more about the limitations than I did. He hid them from me. And so reclaiming the narrative of my childhood, if you can see that picture a little more clear, and it's not just the light, it just really is not a good picture, you can really indicate a lot of things, and you should. You can make assumptions about place and class and people and gender, but you would see that is my baby brother Herschel, and he is quite young. I am the seventh of 8 children, but you see my mother smile, right? So I think that's one of the most important things. And you see me in this family picture captured, and I am quite free and happy. Next to that picture is me and Nikki Giovanni. Thank you. So Nikki Giovanni, you also see the car, and it's just like an indication that, like, you know, Herschel was born in 1990, so we're still, you know, that's a very 80s car. And I think about this, and I hope, see, this is why I always worry, like, I can't talk for a long time. I never get to the slides because I stay on one picture. But to draw connections to there, if you want to look at this through a class lens, it is 1990 if Herschel was born. I was born in 82, so I'm probably 8 years old at the time. But just like Lorraine Hansberry writes in A Raisin in the Sun, one indication of class in the living room of a younger house is that the furniture is 10 years older than the time that we're in it. That this family had not done what other families had done, and I guess bought new furniture every 10 years. So a great indication of class is, while it was the 90s, the cars and the aesthetics are still lingering from the 80s. And now I'm just going to go through every picture and be like, what did they change? Like all of this, that's the dramaturgy. Nikki Giovanni. So again, I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I had the fortunate opportunity to work at a place called the South Dallas Cultural Center. And we partnered with a literary organization before I left, and they brought Nikki Giovanni in as a guest speaker for a public talk similar to this, and also work with some of our youth. And this is us hosting her at a restaurant. So again, to tangibly hold Nikki down, to tangibly hold down space that she was in, again, it's a great joy. I think we can go to the next slide. I wrote Bare Skin, Harold Rosa Bare Skin on August 15th, 2022. what might we think was going on? And we all just go back to August 15th, 2022. And what do we think might have happened? What environment? Might be. And this is an invitation off.
Grief.
Grief.
Sorry.
No,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Grief.
Grief, yeah.
Why grief?
The pandemic, the effect of the pandemic,
That's the pandemic.
yeah, how extensive they were. And at that point, if memory serves, there was still so much uncertainty about the deployment of vaccinations, inequitable access to vaccines that were available. Yeah, grief is my association.
Right. Grief. Someone else?
You mean 20 or 22?
I'm sorry, 20. Did I say 20? Sorry, 2020. Please trust me. August 15th, 2020.
Well, there was murders going on.
Okay. Can you say more about that? And I'm going to invite you to project this, assuming.
Yeah,
They
there was terrible murders of people because of their race, of total injustice, police brutality, cities boiling over, riots, protests. It was a bad time. I know that at Virginia Tech, there were a lot of people of color who felt a little bit abandoned by the university for not responding and saying, hey, this must be painful for you. What can you do?
Murders.
Murders.
Yeah, I think the way I heard it described or resonates to me, those state-based violence, which is a very particular violence, right? When you think that there's state-based safety and public safety, but to have those be the perpetrators and arbitrators of such violence, it's a very specific type of murder. And for those murders to be tied to one's race at the intersection of one's gender, one's race at the intersection of one's gender and presumed or very public sexuality. And for those murders to happen in a succession that is not unusual, but right now it's magnified in such a way, on top of maybe a complementary pandemic, right? August 15th, 2020. What do we think is happening?
August 15, 2020, I was in Africa at the time. Yeah, I think there was a lot of confusion about the pandemic. People in the arts space wanted to go into the field, continue doing their work, and there were curfews and restrictions imposed. And also the coming of the vaccines. Yeah. Some accepted it, some not, so there was backlash, or maybe confusion at that time. Surviving on the other hand, people trying to make it do their work, and on the other end also survival in terms of we need this vaccine or not, don't need it because we want to survive. Everyone they had their own mechanism to survive, whether through the vaccine or not, or to do the work or stay home.
So we're not only talking about domestic challenges, right? Now, for some of us, it's the first time we have to hold this global threats, right? Or whatever else you want to associate with it, when, again, it's the only time in my life where the threat is universal, right? That coronavirus, no matter what the perspective on it, did not care about race and not gender and all of these kind of things. So we were all facing a very, you couldn't buy with a house. So what's capitalism? Totally safe, right? We can give you some access and some power and control, but we have a common threat, right? And a very uncommon humanity. Ashley, I think that's an active link. Also, if we go back, let's see if we can click on it. 10 things you need to know about August 15, 2020. This is also just Virgo trauma service serves, only my curiosities and our collective understanding. So this is from a website called week.com. And if you go down and see what those 10 things are, and again, I invite people who want to be a part of this, read just the headline. One. Out loud.
Postal Service warns delays could prevent votes from being counted in 46 states.
Washington Post, someone read two.
Obama accuses Trump of trying to actively kneecap USPS ahead of election.
Oh, three.
UN Security Council rejects US bid to extend Iran arms embargo.
Four.
CDC recovered coronavirus patients don't need to quarantine, get tested for 3 months.
Five.
Belarusian president appeals to Putin amid protests.
Six.
Trump order gives ByteDance 90 days to sell TikTok.
Seven.
Ex-FBI lawyer to admit to falsifying info to justify Trump campaign surveillance.
Eight.
Government watchdog finds appointment of 2 top DHS officials invalid.
Nine.
California issues rolling blackout during heat wave.
10.
Billie Eilish, John Legend, and the Chicks, and more to perform at DNC, the hottest festival in the US.
According to the week and those various sources that many of us trust or have some kind of complicated relationship, those were the 10 things that we needed to know about August 15, 2020. Some things we brought up, some things we even knew that was happening. But what was omitted? Based on the conversation that we've had, what did we not? The top 10.
State violence.
State violence.
Didn't see the story, right? So we have some global perspective, but maybe not the whole world. Why this is important, I don't know, right? But I know that I have this practice that I've been having of actively writing down the date and time I finish a poem, right? So then I go back to say, okay, if this is what was going on in the world, and even if there are more things more specifically in the world, why rush back to childhood? Why take a creative and artistic opportunity to reflect on your upbringing? I think the answer to me is not clear, but I've already told you it's the only freedom that I know, right? All right, Ashley. Oh, you're amazing, because I could never go back like that and then advance. That's a beautiful transition. October 2020, yes. Something else was happening again. So when at least the week.com and many aspects of the world hadn't included maybe state-based violence and what might be going on in the lives of Black people at the time, the Black Theater Commons could not open, right? The Black Theater Commons, again, as it's stated that I am a member of the steering committee, have begun to alter what we have been working on, because now we were faced with not only 2 kind of pandemics, the racial violence of people, and then also the coronavirus. So we thought as a steering committee, what is our role in this? Like, how do we speak to Black theater practitioners, Black theater makers, and the whole kind of genre of Black theaters? We're the Black theater commons, what's the most common thing to communicate, I think, in this moment. We had been thinking about it before October, but we had worked with 18 writers to produce 18 articles that really called for a revolutionary theater in 2020. So then the October dates were the dates where those things begin to be released. In the next slide, you'll see the description for the call and what we were responding to. In this 1965 essay, The Revolutionary Theater, America Rocca called Black theater makers to respond to the racial injustice and civic unrest in the United States of America and demand that theater challenge the status quo. Now in 2020, history repeats itself. While racial injustices persist, sparking historical worldwide civil unrest, the COVID-19 pandemic rages across the globe. The depth of these historic and relentless pressures are being revealed, and the threat to the lives of Black people and the idea of an America for all is a clear present danger. There is a communal grief from this toll. Amidst an important election cycle, there is a collective push for unprecedented change in our communities and in our field. We're needing to solve. Our Black joy has been able to do for centuries. We need the articulation of a change. It's time for revolution. It is time for revolutionary theater. Was not around in 1965. Again, as a good theater studies practitioner teaching Black theater and culture, I'm very familiar with the work of America Rocca, and I understand the times in which, again, he is called on theater to be revolutionary. This operates within the Black liberation movement and the Black arts movement, and actually America Rocca is known to be a father, right? There are many people who believe, and America Rocca would tend to agree that the Black arts movement started, the Black liberation movement started after the death of Malcolm X. That there was a time, again, where there was something more specific, something that felt more Black and connected to a brand of Blackness that they were not seeing, that they began to call for. So this essay, The Revolutionary Theater, is definitely a response to then the emerging Black power movement, Black liberation movement, Black arts movement. But Rocca is not alone in this thought. If you go to the next slide, we'll hear then from Sonia Sanchez, and many people understand Sonia Sanchez as a poet and not a dramatist, but she also was a dramatist. In the introduction to a book of her plays, the power plays of Sonia Sanchez, the writer writes, Sanchez herself characterizes the African-American poet as a creator of social value, claiming that the most fundamental truth to be told in any art form as far as Blacks are concerned is that America has killed us. But we continue to live and love and struggle and win. The most fundamental truth to be told in any art form as far as Blacks are concerned is that America is killing us. But we continue to live and love, struggle, and win. Even Sanchez is not alone in his thoughts. Baraka is not alone. Sanchez is not alone. If you go to the next slide, a good old fave of mine, Toni Morrison. 1975, Toni Morrison is invited to be a speaker at Portland State University. There's no video of this speech that she gives, but if you can listen to the audio that's been available right now, you get a sense of a lot of things. But it's a closed room, that she is talking directly to Black studies colleagues. That they represent all areas of Black studies, from humanities to the arts to English, all of those things, but it's a room full of practitioners and teachers of various disciplines. But they have come together to understand the emerging field of Black studies in American colleges. If you're familiar with Toni Morrison's quote, "The Function of Racism," then it comes from this speech that she gives and what feels like a very closed room and a conversation among Black colleagues, and definitely those concerned with Black life in 1975 at Portland State University. In it, she says the very function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work, keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Someone says you have no language and you spend 20 years proving that you do. Someone says your head is shaped, isn't shaped properly, so you have scientists working on the fact that it is. Someone says you have no heart, so you dredge that up. someone says you have no kingdom, so you're dredged out. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing. So another question for us to think about as a collective and maybe offer some responses to imperfect. We can talk and draft. It's on the next slide, but we see these two ideas kind of merge. What's the functional antidote to a fundamental truth? If the fundamental truth is that America is killing us being Black people, as Saint Sanchez describes, and a function of racism is distraction, then what is an antidote to that truth? A functional antidote to that truth, because on the account of these three witnesses, racism is functioning well, it's operating, it's distracting, it's doing what it does. It is the truth, the fundamental truth that Saint Sanchez raises. So what might be functional antidotes to the kind of truth? I should have said in my introduction, I did. You know, bell hooks has convinced me that it's important to be a critical thinker. I typically don't have several questions, because I love to engage in critical inquiry. So they make it easier and they make it not, all right? But again, if we can engage in things critically, we might find possible pathways and solutions. So what is a functional antidote to the conflict?
Focus on work.
Focus on work.
Can't be distracted.
Can't be distracted. Focus on work.
Create something, right, that allows people to live their lives.
That creates, I should pay you. You know, split the check between us. All right, someone else, now that we have one offering to build upon that, to respond to.
I guess I'm wondering to what extent does that fundamental truth extend, because it does disproportionately affect people of color, but it like, I've heard America described as a death cult. And this idea that it's, we live in a very violent society that kind of extends and disproportionately affects poor people and people of color, but it's like fundamentally violent for everyone. And to what extent does that, what's the functional antidote to that? I mean, I think that there's some people that would say, oh, we should fix capitalism, or like capitalism is the root of the problem. But then, I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is a really interesting question. And other people would say, well, you fix education, you make education equitable. And other people would say, well, it's political policy. You make a series of political policy choices that then trickle down and affect the way that wealth is distributed within the society. But fundamentally, economics don't work that way. And our educational institutions currently also don't work that way. Like we have hierarchies that are very entrenched. And the word, I don't know, I'll stop in just a second, but the word community keeps coming up, and I'm, especially from a queer perspective, I'm super distrustful of that word. Because, especially in the South, as a queer person, it's like the community is the group of people that'll kill you. Right, like they're the group of people that will come to your house, burn a cross in your yard, and drag you out into the street. That's the community. It may not be a healthy community, but it's certainly a majority of evangelical Christian communities around here. So how do you fix the community that is so often the perpetrator of the violence? There's no answer in that, but that's what that
I
means.
think there's multiple answers. There's not, and I think there's multiple approaches, right, to it. Actually, someone is waiting. Sorry, we're co-facilitating this together. I would encourage you, friend, what's your name? Scotty, to find the whole, so I'm holding the whole speech in my hand. That's what I do. But in his whole speech, Morrison also approaches capitalism. There's a frame that would take too long to set up. When you talk about capitalism, energy that white people never believed that Black people were inferior to her. They just hold that we perform that way and all of that. They just needed to convince us that we were, so they can maintain capitalism. She talks about you don't give your children over to people who are lazy so they can raise them, and all of this stuff. So she does uplift capitalism, right? In the way that it has been used and manifested in society as a way to understand it. So I think there's multiple answers, right? Like you said, it depends on community, and if that's a word that feels kind of hard because who gets control of the community? There are other offerings like tribe, right? Or simply in rooters, we just say my people, right? And we kind of define who our people are at any kind of given time, in context that we have. So I think there are multiple answers. One that Morrison offers. Go to the next slide. She says you don't have to do that anymore. You can talk straight to me, Toni Morrison. It's funny because this speech has a legitimate name, and I always forget it because I call it the Black Artist Declaration. Right? That for a lot of the time in my development as a theater practitioner, we were creating Black art in response to something, right? And largely in response to an oppressed society, a white world, and all of those things. And interesting enough, I was applying for a position at Carnegie Mellon to teach anti-racist theater, and I had to prove why I qualified to teach anti-racist theater to be a tenured track professor. I think it is a mental mind fuck that just takes you into a deep depression. Why do I qualify to teach? And not because they asked, because I qualify to teach anti-racist theater, American theater, right? Which meant I knew enough about racist American theater, right? To help unearth that the anti is a place that we have not gotten to yet. And so in preparation for my career talk about how many years have I been invested in what Toni Morrison would say is a distraction, responding to racism, proving things, creating curriculum and classes and learning environments just because this thing called racism exists and a distraction. It was a very humble. But it was also like, oh my God, this is really, really real. At that time, there was over 15 really dedicated years of investment that prepared me for this. And so when I found the full speech, because I knew the quotes, it liberated. And if I read it in a closer context, it reads something like this. The function of racism, the very serious function of racism, which is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you have no language, so you spend 20 years, 15, proving that you do. Someone says your head isn't shaped properly, so you have scientists working on the fact that it is. Someone says that you have no art, so you dredge that up. Someone says you have no kingdom, so you dredge that up. And I urge you, so she says something, she says none of that is necessary. There's other things that she talks about, but I skip down to the part. And I urge you to be careful, but there is a deadly prison, the prison that is erected when one spends one's life fighting phantoms, concentrating on myths and explaining over and over again to the conqueror your language, your lifestyle, your history, your habits. Here's the Black Boy Declaration, and you don't have to do it anymore. You can go ahead and talk straight to me. So I call it the Black Artist Declaration of Independence. In this moment, in 1975, she actually frees us, right? And at least encourages us to be mindful of how and if we engage with the distraction. Then, because I'm a Virgo, my mind wonders, what does it mean to speak straight to you? Right? What does that mean? Where are we seeing this practice? And how would I even know what language is? Next slide. There enters Harold with flowers. And I think maybe my obsession with aesthetics, right? As a way to understand what language would I use, what visual culture, what would be beautiful if now Toni Morrison is giving me full permission to speak directly to her and not strategically engage in a distraction, but strategically engage in conversations that we understand. This comes from my former job, the Theater Offensive, where we were in a similar situation, right? I joined the staff of the Theater Offensive, I believe in 16, and we began to do 2016, work and looking at a new strategic plan. The Theater Offensive is over 30 years old. When I worked there, it's the ED, I used to know all of this. Now I have to learn another organization's history, so now it's a little fuzzy. But over 30 years old, it was founded in response to HIV/AIDS epidemic at the time and a Reagan administration. And so when I joined the Theater Offensive, we were in a strategic planning moment. And in our DNA, we had always been connected as an LGBTQ organization to people of color. But we had to figure out in this moment what was the most relevant work for this grassroots theater. Abe Ryback, who's the founder, to tell the story that the Theater Offensive had fulfilled its mission twice before. So this was an opportunity to look at another mission. When he started the organization in Boston, it was very, very rare that you could go see LGBTQ theater in Boston. Even rarer, queer theater in Boston. And so that was, they produced that for a while and had to change the mission in I think in 2008 when the stock market crashed and the economy was looking very different and their resources were, not the same. And he said, what do we want to die for? Right? If the Theater Offensive is going to sunset, how do we want to go out? And at that time, they had elected at least 4 or 5 communities that said, we'll work directly in these communities in Boston. They tended to be more people of color communities. And if we cease to exist, at least we had a respectable death. They didn't die. I think a new relevance came into being and the organization thrived long enough to live to 2017 when you're in a strategic planning moment and you ask the question again, because that mission and that work also needed to be re-examined. And if you look at Boston at the time, you could see LGBTQ art. It was at the NEFA, it was at American Repertory Theater, all of these major, big and important cultural institutions were producing. And so again, our little grassroots theater effort had to say, how do we remain relevant in this moment? And the answer became very clear. Those programs, while they were genuine from our other artistic partners, maybe were one-off, right? They were not the constants. And definitely all of them did not include people of color. So was this our moment to be a people of color, a queer organization, queer trans people want to get by mission? So we can be there consistently and constant. And if we did that, who do we need to become aesthetically? If we wanted to speak directly to queer and trans people of color as an act of liberation, what would we have to do? So we work with cultural strategists to organize artists in our community and actually tell us who we needed to become. Those aesthetics are on the website of the Theater Offensive, and I highly encourage if you've not seen them, please engage with them. But on the next slide, I at least want to engage you with the beginning of the thoughts that those cultural strategists, Sage Crump and Cherry Rangel, also Reuters, led us in. We find beauty in what we treasure. We find beauty in what we treasure. And what we treasure, we celebrate, make space for, and fight for. The idea of aesthetics helps us understand the ways we experience beauty and gives us a framework to talk about how we name and claim beauty and why we choose what we choose. Aesthetics are a reflection in the realm of belonging. They communicate a set of shared ideas, geographies, and historical defining moments. So again, aesthetics by definition are a lot of things, but they're definitely connected to beauty, and I think it's connected to that which is recognizable. So if I go back to Morrison, when again, she said you don't have to do that, right? In your art, you can talk directly to me, but you have to talk to me aesthetically, right? That the opportunity is then there that we be in aesthetic relationship with each other. So we set on the path to really define a queer and trans people of color liberatory aesthetic. Then we were faced with another challenge. What is this word queer? What do we mean by queer? And I like the questions because again, it helps us to kind of form more clarity and ideas and live in the complexity of the moment. So if defining aesthetics is not challenging enough and a beautiful opportunity, we had to define or try to explain, it's not necessarily define it. So here are two other offerings. Go to the next slide. From Bell Hooks, who I love, who teaches me how to transgress through her books and her works. If you're not familiar with that word, teaching to transgress. And these are also contemporaries of Nikki Giovanni. So another institution got Bell Hooks, or you all got Nikki Giovanni, but you get this shared, Black feminist perspective that is really rooted and based in love and complex thinking and a lot of beautiful thoughts and ideas, and not defining things, but giving birth to multiple things. So Bell Hooks says queer not as being about who you're having sex with. That can be a dimension of it. But queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it, and that has to invent and create, find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. One of the aesthetics that the theater was able to come up with is lineage of time travel. So if you were going to think of things in a historic way, or with people who kind of maybe pioneers in thoughts, what are those thoughts representing more contemporary? So go to the next slide. There's a younger contemporary of Bell Hooks named Brandon Wynn, who is the writer who looks at it this way: not queer like gay, queer like escaping devils, queer like some sort of fluidity and limitlessness at once, queer like a freedom too strong to be conquered, queer like the fearlessness to imagine what love could be like and pursue it. I bring this up for a variety of reasons. Even if we go back to the title, there's the Black audacity and there's the queer ego, right? What queer people are thinking, how they're defining these things. And both Brandon's and Bell Hooks and Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez and also Toni Morrison are also using the intersection of their Black being and other ways that they identify to respond to a world. Right? That's the commonality, right? They're trying to find language and take up the charge to say there's something that we have to do right now. Because again, the world around us is creating these limitations, these threats and all of these things. So you see in all of these examples how people are responding, right, to an environment. So finally, we go back, if you go to the next slide. We come back to 2020, when that call is out from the Black Theater Commons of Black practitioners to respond, right? We put a call out there. What is the most revolutionary thing that we could do in this moment, right? So you'll see, and this is still on the Black Theater Commons website, but you'll see some of my colleagues, like Nicole Salter, who now runs the theater program at Howard, really thinking about the revolutionary thing. The very, very phenomenal choreographer and director, Camille Brown, is looking at self-care as a revolutionary act. Another practitioner uplifting revolutionary theater is child play. Then, and now. And every time I look at this, I'm just marveled how we did not take in to write about white folks. Right? We have every opportunity, right? It is 2020. We're trying to think about what is the most revolutionary practice of Black theater, given everything that we're facing. How does self-care come up, right? When the world around us and who's oppressing us, and our call and response, this is Black people not falling into the distraction of the racism that we're experiencing. We're actually accepting the offering that Toni Morrison has given us. Speak directly to me, right? I imagine Camille Brown is talking about self-care for Black people, right? And maybe not, but again, the audience is very, very clear in this moment. So, because I got to be the resident queer person connected to queer ideology and a queer organization, I was one of many people to say, you know, how would you respond to this? Thinking about queerness and queer practice in this moment. And even for me, it was an opportunity to think about the practice of theater and how I'm seeing it. I wrote this essay, Manifesting the Metaphor, just the climax for me. If revolutions, if romanticized riots and rotations, then queer folks are destined to be our greatest accomplices in a quest for new radical realities. So any talk about revolutionary theater should include queer ideology and strategy. Freedom as a metaphor transforms that which we thought was not applicable into something attainable. Freedom as a feeling is ephemeral but worth chasing or longing for. The combination of the metaphor or poetic desire and the feeling or sense of affirmation is the climax. The combination of the metaphor or poetic desire and the feeling or sense of affirmation is the climax. The combination of the metaphor or poetic desire and the feeling or sense of affirmation is the climax. Indescribable through a descriptive analysis, but cathartic, orgasmic even. Like freedom on freedom on freedom, like rights be a low bar and power be the move. So what is freedom cubed? Or the power of the desire, the power of the applied, and the power of the indefinite. You know what I mean. Like the first freedom, the metaphor would be hella self-determined. The metaphor is manifested as a second freedom, a feeling or a belief, which then creates a sense of balance. There is no climax, a third freedom to the metaphor is achieved and acknowledged. Like that third freedom, climax be the first plural I. Like climaxes be queer shit. Climaxes like queers be about collectives, like multiple energies, like multiple ideologies, through multiplicity. Climaxes shift circumstances. Like a cultural affirmation that consistently changes circumstances and breaks norms. They birth new realities, give a new set of circumstances and new desires or longings for the constant. Like balance be temporary. Like metaphor be abundant. So queer niggas stay chasing climaxes. Like queer niggas be longing for freedom. Say things like godchildren, say gaudy, pursuing dream sequences at after parties, like that's a butch queen's prerogative. Queer culture be the affirmation. Queer climaxes be the pusher. And American theater be the constants. American theater been longing for liberation, but American theater be normative gay death. Be sustained by hella dominant norms, be transfixed by that which ought to be temporary. Been needing an orgasm, needing to come. Catch this, American theater is the only Western artistic discipline that does not prioritize the works of those which have broken away or never subscribed to European form. Like American theater keeping appearances and shit. Like Miss Thing, again, you're late. Like realism ain't realness, ain't moving the crowd. Like realism is Eurocentric social science, not real queer social imagination. Like queer niggas mess with, but not interested in being drowned by Eurocentric dogma. Like where the queer Black metaphors at? What Black queer desires do we constantly disengage with? Where's the banjo stage? Like some queer theater niggas, I've been longing for liberation on American stages too. Like been gang-ganging on a queer trap aesthetic in American theater that is queerly affirmative, challenges respectability, engages the queer literal and the queer linear, challenges legibility and how Blackness and queerness is read and expressed, engages queer sentences, centers the idiosyncratic, prioritizes fecundity and fertility, and transcends. Like I'll tell you what the new revolutionary theater is to me, queer, fight. Next slide. So again, when you work in Black theater commons, they knew that's the only way I know how to write essays. So they accepted it. That is an essay. It's the only way that I know how to process what a revolutionary theater could be. But again, I get to operate amongst my colleagues, talk directly to Blackness about American theater in a revolutionary moment, and uplift aesthetics that I think are really relevant for the kind of queerness that was described and defined in earlier slides, right? So where have we seen, and keep in mind, this is 2020, right? Queerly affirmative work that challenges respectability. The kind of work that engages the queer literal and the queer linear. People will say, what does that mean? And I was like, well, queer people, we tend to have our own literal, right? And it's not non-literal or not non-linear, right? You know, we can change the sentence structure. And again, there can be a complete sentence that needs no transcript and all of those things. We have a very coded way to speak. We have common codes in our own language and all of that. And I think when you exist in a queer existence, most of the time people are telling you it's none something, it's not something. It's like, no, it's actually what it is. So being very subversive and saying, you know, it's not queerness in a non-literal or non-linear space, and then you redefine it. It's like, it is queerly literal, right? When me and my friends talk, and I love when our straight friends are around us, because then, you know, people are like, girl, I was blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, boy, bro, listen, Miss Thing. And it was just like, who y'all talking? Like, that's the same person. But you say, girl, Miss Thing, boy, bro. I was like, thank you, sis. Like, you know, when do you switch? Whenever you feel like it, right? So is he a boy, is he a girl? It's about energy. You know, it's just like, you don't have to explain, even when we like change and all of those other things. And so again, in theater, I'm wondering what else is queerly literal, queerly linear, right? That the queer way we tell a story may not fit, you know, the Western beginning, middle, and end. We worked at the Theater Offensive with the artist in the field, Steward, and he couldn't figure out how to end the play, a queer artist. And he said, I won't end it. I'll offer 3 offerings as an ending, right? So there's no denouement. It's like, here are 3 offerings, 3 probing questions, and things to kind of end it. Challenges legibility and how Blackness and queerness is read and expressed, right? Some things are legible to us. What is the way we process? Again, this is how I process an essay. It's weird. So synthesis, what's idiosyncratic, what's calm, what's fertile, what keeps giving birth, and what's transcendent. Some of the ways that I thought about it. Next slide. We're almost to it. Sorry. What's also another connection, when I think about the queer child aesthetic in theater, it takes me back to Nika Giovanni. Who has uplifted these people, these identities, these ways of being? It's also said it's okay to be urban, to be ratchet, to be thuggish, or whatever you identify in terms of a respectable culture. Nika Giovanni does that, and she also joins Tupac by tattooing Thug Life on her arm, and he had it on his chest, below his belly, right? So she finds a certain kind of commonality with people who a larger society would say were despicable. The ways were despicable. They had no place in our world of cultural production. The cultural products that they produce are not valid. They were not to be engaged with. They were very harmful. And Nika Giovanni subverts all of that. She makes Tupac an icon. Not only because who he is, because who his mother, politics in which he was born, and the world that he's responding to in a way that he does it. Nika Giovanni also, I believe it's in the 70s, works with a Black gospel, maybe a Baptist church. And she combines some of the traditional or very popular songs of the Black gospel with her poetry, which is highly hilarious because she's talking about having conversations with prostitutes and your peace, you know, so again, and all of these other ways where Nika Giovanni is uplifting these politics and these people against Black respectability and song. And so for that reason alone, I think her clean trap that Nigga Giovanni started this long before we could ever imagine it, in a way that we engage with it. Right now, there's something to be called queer and trapped just on challenging respectability and finding inroads to popular culture. Nigga Giovanni has done that. So I dedicate this work again to Nigga Giovanni. Couple more slides and we can open it up for a conversation. We'll go to the next slide. This is what I'm currently thinking about. And I think if I go back to the topic that I was invited to talk about, the power and practice of art in healthy communities, then this work seems really, really relevant, right? Art as applied social science. On the left is a photo I found on the internet that said it wasn't about water fountains then, it's not about bathrooms now. And that is someone who I believe to be trans. On the right is a quote from a reviewer for a production of As You Like It that I got to produce last summer in June. If you remember what was happening at that time, it's quite funny because drag queen story hours were under assault. There were these narratives about queer life and queer existence that were just, you know, they were so deplorable that they were, you could almost laugh at them. But however, people ran with those narratives and did harm to me, so it wasn't necessarily funny. But again, it was just outrageous. And so we decided that we would do As You Like It as one big drag queen story house, right? That our Rosalind did go on this journey from being and living in a cis woman body to by the end of the play that she could really identify as trans masculine, but still be in love with Oliver, that he would still love every indication that eventually they had. And it was just a wild ride. If you know the show already, you don't have to do much to clear it up and all of those. But if you play with identity, both racial, sexual, gender identity, if you expand it, and if you definitely say this is one big drag queen story hour, you might get a headline that ends your directing career, because I don't think I can do any better than this. I have a production of As You Like It that could get the original text banned at the state floor. Because they were banning everything. They would ban William Shakespeare in Florida. And that would be such an achievement. It was a way to apply what's already out there as art and use it for social gain, social benefit. So that's some of the ways I think about art as applied social science. If I had to try to define it, next slide, it would be here. Art as applied social science concerns itself with the psychological well-being, social welfare of individuals, communities, and society. Why art as applied social science and not just the social sciences, but if you understand how art has been used in a social context like the social sciences, it does tell us who psychologically belong. Even if you look at it, how we build institutions, cultural institutions, it tells you who's important and what's important and all of these things, but everything we know about psychology and sociology and other things that we understand in social science have been applied in a certain way, that now if we understand art and application of art in the same way, we may be able to ensure some psychological well-being and social welfare of individuals, communities, and society. And since we're talking about community health, and I want to honor that community could be a very trivial word, tribal health, health my people, the same-sex positive, self-assisting, so Christian Bible, Christian beliefs that I grew up in, say there are two or more gathered, touching and agreeing, and I'll also there be in the midst. So we have two or more gathered in the spiritual way of being. So what is the psychological well-being, social welfare of those individuals, that sense of belonging in our common society? That's what we are now thinking about as art as applied social science. There's one more slide and a question that will open up our question and answer period. Who has psychological safety in the work we create, work we teach, produce, and engage with? So with that, I thank you. I invite us to continue the conversation.
Thank you.
That last time I get you the job. I need to know.
No. So this is one of the reasons, so in this speech, I think they like that. They actually went with a beautiful choice. I love who they chose. But in this speech also, Toni Morrison says, the Mellons and the Carnegies of the world created social studies, and they studied everybody except themselves. So I also said that. So that might not have gotten me the job at Carnegie Mellon. And the Mellons, right? You know, because they created social studies and studied everybody except themselves. So we're really gonna talk about anti-racism. In this place, have to start with the namesakes. But yeah, but no, they really did choose it. But,
I think it's brilliant, that idea of art as applied social science, and I was thinking about that quote and the, do you mind putting it back at the previous quote?
one of the quick quotes.
No, this one, that concerns itself with, certainly with social organization, because it can also be used to do the opposite, right? I mean, I'm not a theater maker in the traditional sense. I'm in the dance world, and so I trained in modern dance. And one of the things that people don't know very much about modern dance is some of the early thinkers of modern dance that came to America were Nazis. And particularly people like Rudolf von Laban, who developed a system for measuring and basically transcribing human movement. It's still taught today, including by faculty members each year. And a lot of people don't know that he was best friends with Joseph Goebbels. And so in that sense, like the Nazis loved art. They loved art, film, dance in particular, because of the way that it dictated the type of perfection in a human body and organized and systematized everything, including movement. And so I was thinking about this quote in terms of like art as applied social science is also concerned with, and this is kind of what I was saying about community before. It's like, who defines what psychological well-being is? And if it is in a cultural context like that, terrifying, totally terrifying. And in another community context can be completely liberating.
Right.
And so I'm thinking about yeah, whose community is making those choices? Because I know a lot of the films and a lot of the movies, even today that I watch, I'm just horrified by. And a lot of people are consuming them, millions, tens of millions of people.
Right. I think for me, and again, we were talking earlier on the podcast, and they asked me about maybe my theory and my work on identity reclamation, how I got to it. And I was like, by accident, because I thought identity reclamation was already a word. I was not seeking to like come up with this way of defining like how people reclaim their identity. Like it was a part of a practice that I was engaged with, my work at the cultural center, and you know, everybody was reclaiming something, and it had to tend to one aspect or another, and intersecting aspects of their identity. But I kept typing it, and it kept coming. Spell check kept saying it's wrong, but I'm like, it's not wrong, you know. And then I went down this rabbit hole, and the concept of identity reclamation did not exist. It had been written down, and the same thing that you like. Art has been applied as a social science forever, right? You know, I gave some examples, you know, just previously, but again, the way someone has controlled the narrative about my life and what I'm responsible for, what stages I can get on, what I need to look like, what museums are important to be built, where they, like all of these kind of things, how the social sciences, especially if you just look at psychology and sociology, it's like, oh, art has been a weapon in that, right? So since nobody had claimed the space of art as applied social science, we have applied theater, maybe applied dance, you know, I took the opportunity to say, well, let me put it up there here for us to respond to. And like all men who think they claim something, you know, we try to define it and say, now, if I have it out there and I say it concerns itself with these things, someone else has to work strategically in a position to establish. So it appears more hopeful and more optimistic. But you're absolutely right. The experience of American art, which I know most about in this society, has been a weapon and a tool. Not to empower me, but to keep me in some neat place. Interesting at Emerson, I teach African American theater and culture. And it was offered as a 300 level class. And it was like advanced this for the English students and writing students, advanced all of these. And then they needed to redo the curriculum. And it got bumped down to a 200 level class. And it's a special topic in America. That hurts. The African American theater and culture is now a special topic. And it's only for theater students, not for anybody else. And you want to know what other special topics there were? Queer theater was a special topic in American theater. Latinx theater was a special, women in theater was a special topic in American theater.
What was the topic?
Yeah, it's all special.
So anything that was like, so what are the topics? Right, the Western canon, right? So these are the topics in American, in our theater pedagogy at Emerson. And then we have all of these supplemental things that we talk about. So again, you know, what's happening socially and psychologically when African American theater is a special topic. So I have to learn the main thing first, and then I get to supplement that with my thought. So again, this is another very subversive way to say this is not a special topic. You know, it is a main topic.
Yeah, it's also just historically wrong. It would be like teaching Black dance in the US as a supplemental topic, when so much, I mean, it's just like so much.
It's all historically wrong too if you teach American theater, because most American theater is in response to European theater and European aesthetics. And I believe it's James Weldon Johnson who says the only American theater he could think of at the turn of the 20th century was the minstrel show. That is America's only unique contribution to a global theater, right? So it's like, yeah, Black theater is American theater, right? Because you created the minstrel show. The minstrel show birthed a certain type of popular culture here. And it's also, if you look at Americans' contributions to social science, you know, what we got from Europe was a lot, what we contributed to the world was race, right?
I feel like your question about psychological safety fits directly in what you just said about your courses being downgraded to special topics, right? Like who gets to feel safe.
Yeah.
And also, you know, the president of Harvard losing her job, who gets to feel safe?
Yes.
Who didn't feel safe?
And then there's also the whys, right? What gives safety, what takes it away, right? So all of
I want to just put, I will. I want to just put up that Linda Harris Bailey, who has been on Zoom, has had to leave, but she left to say, I would love to participate in this discussion. I have an appointment at 5:30, 6:30. Please share with Harold that he has provided me with thoughts and language that I'd like to share. Blessings, my brother. I send you love and power.
Thank you, my brother. Any other questions, comments, clarifications, concerns, response to the department?
One thing I respond, well, first of all, thank you. Just echo this, but it's been such a pleasure to hear what you've shared with us. I was similarly really animated by that idea of art as applied social science. And what it made me think about in the context of what you presented prior to that is there's a book that was written years back called The Tragedy. There was a book written years ago called The Tragedy of Political Science that was talking about what was wrong with social sciences writ large. And the author coined a term, Methodism, which is this preoccupation with how we measure and try to anticipate human behavior. And I think what's so powerful about the phrase that you articulated, art as applied social science, in the context particularly of the quotes about queerness, defining queer identity, was the notion that what's amazing about art is one, its articulation of individual voice, and specifically queer aesthetics as a response to Brandon Mint, is that his name? This idea that it's at odds, which with that, which is considered mainstream, predictable. Like I appreciate the paradox in that.
Yeah. And I think the other question, I mean, and it really is a real question, where have we seen this on American stages? And I would like to, you know, do a progress report and an update on progress where now, so in 2020, it was not common to see what I would call the Banshee stage, right? And Banshee has this connection to being ratchet, to being good, to being like all of those kind of once derogatory. And now, again, when you reclaim a certain type of lexicon, you know, and queer languages, people love to be Banshee, right? They may say, oh girl, you're a band. That is a Banshee outfit, Miss Thing, you know, but Banshee at one point was described, you know, something else. So all of these ways which is happening, and I think about the work of Jordan Cooper, or Dungeon Love, you know, who writes in the aesthetic, the queer trap aesthetic, whether they engage with it or not, because it's really organic. And I have a friend now who has a play at Actors Theater, Jonathan, who has a play I Have Delivered, and it really is queer church members who happen to be on the usher board of a Black church outside. So it actually happens outside the church, and you get to see the ushers just be queer and free and fine. And I think it's so, when you talk about specificity, it is what's going on inside the church is the 7 last sermons. You know, and I don't know, I know it's really big in Methodism, it's really big in the Black church where you invite 7 preachers to give a sermonette right before Easter. So I'm just like, that level of specificity, because if you ever went to a 7 last sermons before Good Friday and Easter Sunday, it's like, Black is like kind of thing to have the ushers outside smoking and cussing, and some boy coming in there to reclaim his boyfriend in the church, and it's just like, wow. But it operates again in what I would call a queer trap aesthetic, where, and it was first produced and premiered at the Dallas Theater Center, and the report was Black people would walk out. Because they thought they were coming to see a play about a Black church that they knew and understood, but yet it's still, the language was vulgar, the subject matter, while they knew it was queerness, they wanted, you know, a nice little queer story of acceptance and love is love and Jesus loved us all. But now we have these big lesbian ushers smoking and cussing outside of our sacred house. And it's just like, if we can't produce that on American stages, then where else do we explore these lives and all of those things? So I think the revolution has happened, right? It may be organic, you know. That Ham on Broadway, I think, is another example of where there's a certain prioritization of a certain type of people in relationship to each other and the lives that they live. You know, in America, theater had to be respected for a long time for it to be on stage. That's why many people would run to Europe. I was in college when there was a big headline, you know, you know, from theater, right? And so that was just, you know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where we thought it was, you know, highly controversial, right? Sex scenes were really, really mediated in a certain way. So, you know, it's really gratifying to see that if that's not your thing, don't come see the show. But don't say that people cannot produce theater or at least engage with the great imagination of people's lives in its totality, right? That there's no audience for that, that is not valid. The interesting thing is queer people, especially queer people of color, especially queer Black people, are always at the cutting edge of this, right? You know, Hamilton is possible because of queer Black people, right? And the effects of it is that everyone is transformed. We have a more casual desire. We all live in the space of kind of communal belonging and in a different relationship with respect to it. But we never get the credit, right? We never talk about the source, and we never invest in the people who were pioneers in this work. In the last election cycle, there was a candidate, had to be a Democrat, white guy, and his family went to organize, maybe in South Carolina, because they went to an HBCU where he needed to gather votes there. And the opening song in the act was the rapper who sings "Back That Ass Up." So I'm like, look at this modern American family of politician white people at an HBCU dancing to "Back That Ass Up," like to win over the votes of HBCU students. I'm like, now this is wild, right? You know, and when you know a couple of years ago, this might have been not this particular family, but who they represent, the same people that would talk about baby mamas, right? And if you're familiar with the Color Museum, George C. Willis Color Museum, there's a segment that's about Norma Jean, and Norma Jean, and so Color Museum, Jack American Theater and Culture, so I got a lot of references. The Color Museum is George C. Willis' play. I call it a very prophetic play. He writes it at the end of the 90s, but it prophesies what life will be like for Black people. He writes it at the end of the 80s, and it prophesies what life will be like for Black people at the 90s. Even the emergence of hip hop is highly prophetic. And so one of the exhibits is a character called Norma Jean. Norma Jean's monologue opens with "God made the exceptional, God made somebody else." And then she says, when he got bored, he made me. That's what our mama told her. God made her when he got bored. And then she says, well, mama, don't say too much now, not since I laid this egg. And so she reveals this large egg. It all started when I was having sexual relations with the garbage man. Ooh, did he smell? Not bad. But right, so even amongst Black communities, this, and Norma Jean is an adult, but again, she's been portrayed as a child because of her choices. She has sexual relationships with the garbage man. And they produce this egg. The metaphor is really the children of the 90s who were not in respective ways. And so when I go back to this politician but Norma Jean believes her babies will change the world, right? And I'm like, I think these are Norma Jean's babies, like at this college right now. And this politician, because again, there was no respectability there, is literally dancing on stage to "Back That Ass Up." And my mind is, I'm going wild because I'm like, how did these worlds collide? And a group of people who were, not looked upon as respectable, now are the key to clinching the vote. So yes, I don't know why with that next time, but there is this way in which I think certain type of people who do not subscribe to respectability are always the pioneers, right? Just breaking it down for someone else. In the podcast today, I was able to talk about, the work that I do is about working around these notions. I work in service to Black liberation, building with allies along the way, but I'm really clear it's about Black liberation. And some may ask, well, how are you liberating white people? And I say I liberate white people from the idea and the notion that they have to maintain the myth of white supremacy, that it is a burden to hold a myth and a lie, and all that. And Toni Morrison talks about that too. You're chasing the phantom, right? So while directly, I may not say that, and it may be indirect, but there is a real gift, I believe, when you are the dominant class, you let go of that dominance and allow more people in, whether that's being cis or male, and all of that stuff. You tend to enjoy life a lot better.
Harold, I want to thank you so much for what you have brought to us. I'm compelled to say, just in response to your question about safety, I'm thinking about the observation that people have made, particularly around John Lewis,
Mm.
that what he was moving for
Mhm.
was not civil rights, but nonviolent life.
Mhm.
That the movement that was coming forward at that time has been relegated to civil rights.
Mhm.
But in fact, there was a struggle that is going on today, which is where I feel you're speaking from. The revolutionary notion that
Yeah.
we don't have to predicate
Yeah.
our art on violence.
Yeah,
We don't have to predicate our art on conflict.
yeah.
But how do we come to where else is there? And there are many manifestations of that, but they're put over in the special studies category.
We call those comedies, things that make us laugh.
Yes.
But drama is drama, conflict is conflict, and that's why I think it was so important to redefine the climax, right? Because
Yeah.
climaxes have always been in relationship to the conflict on stage, and it's like, I define climax as a moment of pure joy and lack of control. Whatever gives you pure joy. Oh, I'm sorry, a pure, a pure release, right? So whether it's joy, and I think it's joy and lack of control, then you found your climax. And sometimes it's in relationship to what's oppressing you, but sometimes it's not. A climax in my intimate space in my bedroom, it's not an oppressive thing. It's a beautiful journey to get to, that thing, but you can have climaxes, you can have drama, you can have all of these other things. And it's not related to the kind of oppression or the violence that you speak of. Carol McCoy, another reader.
Yep.
When we reduce, part of my bio that says I work with actually quoting Carol McCoy when she retired from alternate roots, started that kind of agency. And we would do this workshop where you would discover, based on her framework, that race was a lie, right? That there was no scientific backing for race, there was no, but she would say racism is real, right? And then she would ask the question, how do you maintain a lie? How do you maintain a lie?
Yeah.
Through violence, right? And then we would do, this exploration to where has violence been used to maintain a lie? Is this male to woman? Black to white, or white to black, white to any other kind of entity. But the sheer violence in this world that we deploy is usually to maintain some type of lie, right? That's what gives it, a sense of legitimacy where ideas get instituted. So you're absolutely right. If we took violence off stage, what would we have?
It's interesting. I slightly disagree with that. Like, I think it doesn't have to be to justify a lie. It can be more just like, this is my tribe over here and you're not part of my tribe. Back to that idea of like tribe.
But why wouldn't you be part of that tribe?
Because we see other groups of people as threats often.
Are they a threat?
No.
So you're maintaining a lie.
Well, the nervous system might be maintained, or the cultural construct might be maintained.
Yes.
It's not a lie if people believe it. And but I'm also curious about how do you break that? And I'm curious about seduction. Because I hear it when you're talking, like I hear it in your energy, and I hear it when you're speaking about this, the idea of like, and also like Audre Lorde, like art as eros, to like this, like the power of eros in seducing, like seduction as an alternative to violence, and like how to get those things off the special topics category. Like, who do I need to seduce in order to, which administrator do I need to talk to in order to get this to change? How do I seduce my colleagues into rethinking their curriculum? I've failed at this. I fail at it constantly, but I'm just like curious at like what's the seduction hack? That, or you just keep trying to seduce.
I think it goes back, if you can go back to the Sonia Sanchez quote, right? The fundamental truth that American is killing us, but then there's the but. We live, all this, that, and the other. So I think you keep seducing. Bell Hooks in Teaching to Transgress talks about a sense of intimacy in schools. right? That it was important that intimacy had left the classroom for a lot of reasons. And so there was no space for the central, which is kind of very, very, very kind of spiritual, right? So again, I think there is a bit of great power, as you said, Audrey Lord, right? The power of erotic. Very, very powerful thing. In my life, oftentimes the same person who wants to kill me wants to fuck. Right?
I think it's a Virgo thing. That might be a Virgo.
It is two sides of the same coin.
Isn't our brain in the same? Amygdala, it's back there.
Which is like, it's trippy, right? You know, it's like, you want me to cease to exist, but after you've had your way, right? So seduction can be very, very risky as well, when you are seducing your enemy. I think that's why, if I go back to Morrison quotes, I go, well, is that necessary? You know, can I seduce my, can I have the kind of suitor that's not my enemy? So at Emerson, I am aware that I'm in a supplemental kind of category. I either choose to teach it or not. I've made it known, but to change the whole pedagogy of the theater studies department at Emerson is not an objective.
Yeah.
Now, what happens when, you know, students start walking out because they're not seeing themselves reflected in the, you know, then you get an email, right? Hey, Harold, race-based professor, African-American theater and culture.
Seduction will happen.
It will happen, right?
Class of 300 up.
We want to make that like the students can you, and I'm like, I'm actually, what was really for real enticing about the Carnegie Mellon offering, it was a tenure track position. I was like, wow, you created a tenure track position in anti-racist theater as a class. Now you have to build a whole department. That's also why I did the job, because I was like one professor, right? And it's like, what else is in relationship to this? The same way that you teach dramaturgy, how would you teach anti-racist theater? It's not one class to every person.
Correct. I think we have to honor the time. There are folks on Zoom. I want to make sure that anyone on Zoom, is there anything that you might feel a need to speak to or bring forward before we finish up? One last chance. If you do, just unmute and speak up. Oh, shit. All right. I don't see anything. Very good. Thank you all very much. Let's give another round. Lots of clapping, hands going. Excellent.
I just want